A short presentation on the idea of measure for measure. How many here have heard that term? Okay, so we all pretty much know what that term is, and we're going to see it in the text itself. Aaron and his sons were to prepare the animal sacrifices on the 8th day. The 8th day, very important, because this was going to be the day after taking 7 days to prepare the tabernacle, tearing it down, building it up, tearing it down, building it. Finally, the 8th day was when the presence of Hashem was going to come upon the altar, and the children of Israel were going to see the presence and the glory of God. It's a very, very important day. And before they could see this event take place, the glory of God was shown to the entire nation, and a fire went out from before God and consumed the burnt offering and the fats which they offered. The entire nation saw and celebrated and fell on their faces. This moment, the climax, is so much work and ritual, is what the tabernacle was all about. The palpable presence of God experienced by the entire people, and the feeling of awe is something that was so expected and exciting. But there was the issue of a strange fire. What is the issue of the strange fire? It says in verse 1, the sons of Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, each took his fire pan, and they put fire in them and placed incense upon them, and they brought them before Hashem, an alien fire that he had not commanded them. A fire came forth from before Hashem and consumed them, and they died before Hashem. Moses said to Aaron, of this did Hashem speak, saying, I will sanctify those through whom are nearest me. This is chapter 10 of Leviticus. Thus I will be honored before the entire people, and Aaron was silenced. Now this little bit of text has sparked many hours of debate and discussion in the Midrash as to what does this mean? Why is this story laid out on the most important day of Israel's journey to see the very presence of God, and then two of the Kohanim, which was Aaron's sons, were struck dead? According to what we read in this story, they brought a strange fire. Now later on we're going to understand that some of the commentators say that the reason why that this was a sin or a negative act was that they were intoxicated. Well, the act of intoxication wasn't the sin. It was the fact that they made a very terrible error in judgment. They did something that they were not supposed to do. Now, it's interesting, sometimes in politics, and people of high power tend to get away with things that the common man won't get away. They tend to want to push the limit of their power. Or you might see a police officer who, when he's not working, he's breaking laws, speeding and running red lights, and for some reason is able to get away from it because he shows his badge. That's the kind of thing. It's not appropriate. But in Jewish law, the person who has the most responsibility and the closest to God has to be sanctified in their life, and they have to live at a higher example. These two young men, simply out of their religious fervor, decided to do something out of the unction of their heart and the zeal for God. This was not an intentional sin. They did not go to do this for any other reason than to bring the presence of God. They figured, hey, let's bring a fire from outside the altar, and we'll go into the holy place and Holy of Holies, and we'll sprinkle the incense, and the presence of God will come. The concept of measure for measure is pretty interesting. Why do I mention this here? Is that it appears that we learn from this story how God rectifies a situation or dispenses justice measure for measure. What did they bring? They brought fire and incense. Fire can be seen and felt by touch. Incense, smell in the nose, they can smell it. So what did God do? He sent a holy fire up their nose and took their soul. It didn't consume their bodies. How do we know that? Because it says that they were carried out in their tunics. That, matter of fact, the tunics wouldn't even burn. So the presence of God came and snatched their soul out of them. Now, why do I mention this today, and what lesson are we going to learn is this? There are many things that we can do that are legal, but not proper. There are a lot of things that can be done even according to Torah law, but might not be proper for all people to do. That's why one of the things that we've discussed ad nauseum here, and Adam's our residential expert on the idea of understanding what the halakha says for the non-Jew, and how important it is for us to realize what our place is. I mean, we should be careful where we trod. Though Hashem treats us with great loving kindness, we should also be respectful of the Torah law and what it actually says. That's why it's important for us to know what the Torah actually says, so that we don't go where angels fear to trod. Now think of a few things that could be lawful but not expedient to do in just our normal daily life. What would be lawful but not expedient? That could affect us and bring judgment in our life.
Eating bacon, eating pork.
Huh?
Eating pork.
Eating pork's good. That's a good one. How about speaking negative about somebody? Can you speak negative about somebody and have the best of intentions? Yeah, of course. We all done it. We're professionals at it, right? You can speak negative of somebody, and it's funny because you always pretty much know that the person's going to tell you if they say, I'm not getting ready to speak Lashon Hara, but it's like, okay, here it comes, right? But the whole point is, we have to have the right intent. And it's very easy for us to get caught up in a world where we don't realize that God does pay measure for measure, good and bad. Let's look at a couple of instances. We see that Vashti, which was the queen in the story of the Megillah, says that she was put to death for not appearing before her husband in the nude. And the reason why, according to the Midrash, is that she had had the Jewish women stripped and put into slavery. It was like measure for measure. God says, okay, this is what you do to these modest, beautiful women. I'm going to have you stripped and killed yourself. Measure for measure. There's a lot of things in our life that we can do. If we're not, as Miss Betty said last week, conscious, God conscious, having divine consciousness. If we're not aware, our actions have a reaction. It's not because God is a capricious God. Is that the right word? Capricious God. Who stands in waiting to send out bolts of lightning to strike someone down. He has set up the system in His natural laws and His divine law that says if one does this, then this is the result. It's just the natural result of doing whatever you do. So if you, for example, if you are a stingy person, what happens to your finances? God, in measure for measure, will withhold His gifts to you. If I'm a selfish person, then Hashem, measure for measure. It's not that the creator of the universe can be a selfish being. It's just that the result of that will be in my life, I will meet the most selfish people. If I'm a bitter person who refuses to respect others, then that is the kind of treatment I will receive in the world. Now, we know that God says that He will keep His promises even to those who are wicked and those who are righteous. He'll pay back the righteous. How does God pay back the righteous? You know, if a righteous person does, even if a wicked person does something good, God will pay him for it. He'll make sure that they're paid, in this life, of course, and give an opportunity to do tshuva. But a righteous person can also have negative effects take place and not even be conscious that they are in that place. The 49 days of counting the Omer is such an important lesson for us to realize that if God treats measure for measure our actions, then how much more should we be examining the negative actions that are bringing negative result in our life? So the lesson from Nadab and Abihu is sure they, with all the right reasons, did the wrong thing. It says unauthorized fire. They just were not supposed to do what they were supposed to do. And their life was taken. Now it's interesting that Moshe gives the statement that when God would sanctify the tabernacle. It says, what Moses was talking about when he said to Aaron, that this is what God was referring to when he said, with those close to me I will be sanctified. When did God say this? According to Rashi, quotes from the Midrash that appears in the Talmud, which elaborates on Moshe's words, according to this Midrash, back in Exodus, along with the original commandment to build the tabernacle, God said that the tabernacle would be hallowed by His glory. At the time, Moses thought that it was talking about he and Aaron, right? They would be the people that would die. Moses apparently understood that this meant that the glory, the God's most glorious and respected followers, he and Aaron, would be the ones that would die. But after the deaths of Nadab and Abihu, Moshe tells Aaron, until now, he had thought that God meant that either himself or Aaron, the two elders, the people died, whereby somehow sanctify the worldly temple. But now Aaron's son had died. Moses sees that they are, the fact, greater than Moshe and Aaron. Now, how in the world do we answer this contradictory concept? How is it that Nadab and Abihu are like greater than Moshe and Aaron? They made a foolish mistake. So what is it? There's a couple of thoughts that go along with this, and it is interesting, to say the least, that these two young men, out of maybe their youth and fervor, did something from their heart that was spontaneous and pure. You see, Moshe is not saying, what Moshe is saying is that spontaneity and purity of heart that drives you to have zeal is really important. It's an important part. But when it comes to the tabernacle, when it comes to the temple and the temple service, it wasn't calling for spontaneity and zeal. It was calling for extreme discipline and rigorous attention to detail according to the law. Why? Because the divine presence was going to be there. With the divine presence there, it was mandated that everything should be done according to perfection and plan, because if not, it's like playing with a nuclear warhead, right? You just don't go in there and treat it casually. We remember the words of Hashem when He says, if you treat me casually, I will treat you casually. Measure for measure. So why is the statement said that they're greater than Moshe and Aaron? It seems to underscore the value, like I said, of spontaneity and creativity and personal statement and religious activity. On the other hand, the boys indicate that such approach is dangerous. Outside of the temple confines, in some other unspecified area of religious life, the sensibilities of Nadab and Abihu represent a very wonderful trait of spirituality. The Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto says that a zeal without knowledge and without understanding is dangerous. It's like running out of a fire with and being saved and running back in to get your pitchers or to get a glass of water. Who knows, right? I mean, zeal is one thing, but you've got to have knowledge and you have to understand. God responds to man, as I said, measure to measure. In the Hebrew word, this Hebrew word is called Midda K'negged Midda, which means if a man sins with evil speech, God will respond. If the man is worthy, with a commensurate punishment measure. For example, when Miriam spoke poorly of her brother Moses, God afflicted her with leprosy. In general, leprosy is visited upon those who slander another. The justice for measure there is a sense one slanders in order to destroy another, so as to lift their own reputation and self-image. The proper response is that which isolates that person is, and also lowers their ego and basically humiliates them, because the same experience that they presented to someone else, they're receiving as well. With that being said, I would like to conclude with this idea, that each one of us here, though we're not like High Kohen Gadol, God will hold us accountable for what we say and do and how we act. And we cannot forget that we are rewarded or punished even in this physical life by the actions that we measure out to others. Hashem is looking at us to see if we are doing things that are inappropriate. It might be legal, might be good, but it's not proper. God didn't ask you to do that. And that is why we take the 49 days of counting the Omer and we rectify ourselves and draw closer to Hashem. May you all draw closer to Hashem, and may you see the presence of Hashem come into your life this year during Shavuot. That concludes this part of the discussion. We'll continue on with the next part.